The label started when I was 12, the day Mom discovered my business proposal for a small neighborhood lawn mowing service scribbled carefully in purple gel pen. I'd spent an entire afternoon outlining schedules, pricing, and a map of nearby houses that might need their yards trimmed. To me, it felt like the beginning of something exciting, proof that even at that age I could organize an idea into something real. But Mom had only smiled in that patient way adults do when they think a child is playing pretend. Dreams are adorable, sweetheart, but you need to be honest about what you're actually capable of, she'd said gently, sliding the pages, complete with my neatly drawn charts and calculations, straight into the recycling bin. Maybe it's better if you focus on being helpful to others instead. 23 years later, that single moment had grown into a permanent label, one my family repeated so often it felt carved into the way they saw me. At every holiday dinner, every birthday celebration, every casual introduction to their friends or coworkers, I was presented the same way. Their secretary, their assistant, the daughter who never quite climbed past the bottom rung of the professional ladder, the girl who was reliable and organized, but not exactly ambitious. Over time, the description hardened into family tradition. Nobody questioned it because everyone had heard it repeated so many times that it simply became truth. The pattern repeated itself through every stage of my life. When I graduated from college with a degree in computer science, a milestone I had worked toward for years, Dad casually told relatives that I had found something practical doing office support work for tech companies out west. When I packed my bags and moved to Silicon Valley, Mom informed curious neighbors that I handled filing and clerical tasks for tech companies out west. When I managed to purchase my first home at 25, they concluded I must have received generous help with the down payment because in their minds, secretaries simply didn't earn enough to buy property on their own. Each new assumption layered neatly on top of the last one until the entire story felt airtight. Within the family narrative, I had been assigned a permanent role. I was the dependable organizer, the quiet supporter, the person who kept things running smoothly behind the scenes, while other people stepped forward to achieve the impressive milestones. My place was to help others succeed, never to chase that success myself. The irony of it all was something I noticed constantly, even if I rarely said it out loud. While my family imagined me stuck forever at the lowest rung of an office hierarchy, by 27, I had already been promoted to senior engineer at 3 separate startups. While they worried politely about my limited career prospects, venture capital investors returned my calls within hours whenever I reached out. While they encouraged me to stay grounded and realistic about what I could accomplish, I spent my days solving complex system failures and refining platforms that processed millions of transactions every single day for companies whose products filled their homes. Keeping their comfortable illusion alive eventually turned into a job of its own. Every conversation with them required careful editing on my part. I removed any mention of board meetings, startup funding rounds, acquisition negotiations, or patent applications. During family visits, I deliberately dressed more casually than usual, chose to drive my older car instead of the newer one, and answered questions about work with vague descriptions like computer stuff or office tasks. Maintaining that illusion often felt exhausting, like performing a role in a play that never ended, yet correcting their assumptions felt even more complicated. Their version of the story had been repeated for so long that challenging it might feel like rewriting the entire family dynamic. Tonight's event was Dad's company holiday party at the Meridian Country Club, a place where he had maintained membership for the past 15 years. I knew the building almost as well as my childhood home. I had eaten countless family dinners there, watched him shake hands with fellow executives across its polished dining rooms, and listened to his quiet lectures about the invisible ladder of success. According to Dad's worldview, society worked because people understood their place. Some individuals were born with leadership instincts, destined to guide and manage. Others were meant to follow directions and keep the machinery running. In his opinion, I had clearly inherited Mom's supportive personality rather than his decisive executive mindset. "Sarah, just let me handle the talking tonight," Dad reminded me as we drove toward the club. "These people are valuable business contacts, and impressions matter. Just smile, be polite, and don't jump into discussions about things you aren't familiar with." I simply nodded from the back seat. It was the same seat I had occupied on childhood road trips, while Dad explained how the adult world worked. Mom sat beside him in the passenger seat, naturally positioned as his partner in both marriage and social standing. Michael sat directly behind Dad, the seat that seemed to symbolize the future heir to the family's professional success. My seat behind Mom felt equally symbolic. Quiet, supportive, and slightly removed from the center of attention. As we stepped through the marble entrance hall, the familiar hum of conversation and clinking glasses filled the air. Crystal chandeliers reflected light across the polished floors, and clusters of well-dressed executives gathered in small circles, discussing quarterly results, investments, and expansion plans. Dad spotted his boss almost immediately. "David, come bring your family over here," called Mr. Harrison, the regional vice president. Dad's posture straightened with pride as he gestured for us to follow him across the foyer. Moments like this were important to him. Presenting his family to senior leadership allowed him to reinforce the image of a stable, successful household, one that reflected well on his judgment and values. The introductions unfolded exactly the way they always did, like lines rehearsed for years. "This is my wife, Margaret," he began confidently. "She's a wonderful homemaker who keeps everything in our household running perfectly." Mom smiled graciously and shook hands, accepting the compliment with practiced ease. "And this is my son, Michael," Dad continued, resting a proud hand on my brother's shoulder. "He recently became a partner at his law firm downtown. He's working on some very significant merger cases this year." Michael adjusted his tie and returned the handshake with calm confidence. At 31, he perfectly represented everything Dad admired: an impressive title, a prestigious career path, and the kind of professional network that strengthened the family's reputation in social circles. Then Dad turned slightly toward me, placing his hand lightly on my shoulder. I felt the familiar pressure of lowered expectations settle over the moment. "And this is my daughter, Sarah. She's our secretary." The sentence floated in the air exactly the way it always did, heavy with assumptions about my place within the family hierarchy. Mr. Harrison smiled politely as he shook my hand, but his attention drifted almost immediately back toward Dad and Michael, as though the real conversation involved them. "How nice," Mrs. Harrison said with a pleasant but distant nod. The expression on her face suggested she had already placed me neatly into the category of background staff. "Secretary work is very important. Someone has to keep the important people organized." Michael chuckled softly beside us, just loud enough for everyone to hear the undertone in his voice. "Sarah's been entry level forever," he said casually. "Some people just feel more comfortable supporting others. Not everyone has the natural instincts needed for leadership." A few approving smiles appeared around the group, subtle acknowledgments that they agreed with the sentiment. The moment reinforced what they all believed about the way ambition worked: that certain people were meant to lead, while others were simply meant to assist, keeping everything orderly behind the scenes. I smiled and nodded in response, the same reaction I'd perfected over decades of similar moments. "That's true," I agreed pleasantly. "I'm definitely more comfortable in the background." Dad beamed at my appropriately modest response. This was exactly how these interactions were supposed to go. I played my role as the humble family secretary. He maintained his image as the successful executive with the properly ordered household, and everyone stayed comfortable in their assigned positions. "Sarah's always been our practical one," Mom added, joining the conversation with a plate of appetizers balanced expertly in one hand. "Never had those unrealistic dreams that cause so much disappointment. She knows her strengths and stays within them." The conversation flowed around me as it always did, touching on Michael's latest case, Dad's promotion prospects, and Mom's charity work. I was present but peripheral, acknowledged but not consulted, introduced but not interviewed.
The family secretary taking mental notes and staying appropriately invisible while the important people discussed important things. Michael's working on a fascinating acquisition case, Dad was explaining to Mr. Harrison. Two technology companies merging their operations. The legal complexities are staggering, but he's navigating them brilliantly. Technology mergers are incredibly complex, Mr. Harrison agreed. The due diligence alone requires understanding systems most lawyers never encounter. Your son must have exceptional analytical skills. I listened to their discussion of intellectual property transfers, regulatory compliance requirements, and valuation methodologies with the detached interest appropriate for someone whose job involved filing rather than strategic thinking. Of course, I'd been through 7 acquisition processes myself, 3 as the target company CEO and 4 as the acquiring party, but that information didn't fit the evening's social dynamics. At dinner, the seating arrangement followed predictable patterns. Dad at the head table with other executives, Mom beside him discussing their upcoming cruise to celebrate his recent promotion. Michael was positioned 3 tables over with other young professionals, networking aggressively and collecting business cards that might advance his career. I was seated at table 7 with the other support staff and family members who didn't quite fit the evening's executive theme. The placement wasn't intended as an insult exactly, but rather as an acknowledgement of social reality. Secretaries sat with other secretaries, leaving the leadership discussions to people qualified to participate in them. "So, you work for your father?" asked Janet, the wife of one of Dad's colleagues. She seemed genuinely interested, which was refreshing after years of polite dismissal. "In a way," I replied carefully, cutting my salmon into precise pieces. "I help keep things organized." "That must be nice working with family. Very stable, very secure, no need to worry about office politics or competition." I nodded and smiled because stability and security were exactly what everyone expected me to value most.
Not for me the uncertainty of entrepreneurship or the stress of high-stakes decision-making. I was the family secretary, and secretaries valued predictability above all else. Stability is definitely important, I agreed, taking a sip of wine. Some people thrive on chaos, but I prefer knowing what to expect. Janet launched into a story about her daughter's struggles in the competitive marketing industry, contrasting it with my sensible choice to prioritize security over advancement. Around the table, other conversations touched on similar themes: the wisdom of knowing your limitations, the dangers of unrealistic ambitions, the value of finding contentment in modest achievements. I participated appropriately, asking thoughtful questions and offering supportive comments, while revealing nothing that might complicate their understanding of who I was supposed to be. The performance had become second nature after years of practice, as automatic as breathing. After dinner, the evening's program began with awards in recognition for Dad's company's most successful year in decades. As the regional VP took the stage, Dad's table leaned forward with the attention of people who understood they were witnessing something significant in their professional community. "This year has been extraordinary for our industry," Mr. Harrison announced, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. "We've seen consolidation at unprecedented levels, innovation that's reshaping entire market segments, and leadership that's redefining how business gets done in the digital age." The lights dimmed as a presentation began, showcasing the year's biggest business stories with professional slides and compelling graphics. Mergers worth billions of dollars, startup acquisitions that made front-page news, technological breakthroughs that disrupted industries overnight. Dad watched with the focused intensity of someone trying to understand forces much larger than his regional office. "The business landscape is changing faster than ever before," Mr. Harrison continued, over images of gleaming corporate headquarters and bustling trading floors. "Traditional boundaries between industries are dissolving. Geographic limitations are becoming irrelevant. The most successful leaders today are the ones who saw these changes coming years ago and positioned themselves accordingly."
Slides flashed across the screen showing Fortune covers, Forbes rankings, and Wall Street Journal headlines. Stories of executives who'd built empires from nothing, entrepreneurs who'd revolutionized entire industries, innovators who'd created completely new markets worth hundreds of billions in total value. Some of these leaders started in the most unexpected places, Mr. Harrison noted, advancing to a slide showing a garage-based startup that had become a global technology powerhouse. They didn't follow traditional career paths or conventional wisdom. They saw opportunities where others saw obstacles, built bridges where others saw walls. I watched Dad's face as the presentation continued, recognizing his expression of professional admiration mixed with personal distance. These were the stories he read about in business magazines during his commute, the kind of extraordinary success that happened to other people in other cities. Inspiring, certainly, but ultimately separate from his world of regional management and country club networking. The common thread running through all these success stories, Mr. Harrison explained, is vision combined with relentless execution. These leaders didn't just dream big, they built the systems, relationships, and capabilities necessary to make those dreams into measurable reality. Michael leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, with the confidence of someone who saw himself reflected in these narratives. His law firm handled mergers and acquisitions for mid-sized companies, so he understood the mechanics of business transformation, even if he wasn't driving the process personally. He belonged in conversations about multi-million-dollar deals and market disruption. Meanwhile, I continued cutting my salmon into smaller and smaller pieces, maintaining the pleasant but detached expression of someone who found these stories interesting but not personally relevant. The family secretary appropriately impressed by achievements that were clearly far beyond her sphere of influence or understanding. The technology sector has been particularly dynamic, Mr. Harrison continued, advancing to slides showing cloud computing infrastructure and data processing capabilities. Companies that were barely known 5 years ago are now essential to how business operates worldwide. Images flashed across the screen of server farms, fiber optic networks, and digital interfaces that looked remarkably similar to the systems I'd been designing and scaling for the past 8 years. But of course, that observation didn't fit with my role as someone who helped file important documents for other people. Now, Mr. Harrison said, his tone shifting to suggest something particularly significant was coming. I want to share something that hit particularly close to home this week, something that reminded me how quickly our industry is evolving and how important it is to recognize excellence wherever we find it. The screen filled with a familiar magazine cover, the distinctive Fortune logo bold across the top in the magazine's signature red typography. This month's Fortune features their annual CEO of the Year recognition, highlighting executives who've demonstrated exceptional leadership during the most challenging business environment in decades. Dad straightened in his chair, the automatic response of someone who'd been subscribing to Fortune for 20 years and studying the strategies of America's most successful business leaders. These were his professional heroes, the people whose careers represented the absolute pinnacle of executive achievement. The winner this year is particularly noteworthy, Mr. Harrison continued, because she represents something we're seeing more and more in today's business environment.
A leader who built a global technology empire from absolutely nothing, revolutionizing how companies manage their digital infrastructure and data processing needs. The magazine cover came into sharp focus on the screen, professionally lit and expertly composed. There, photographed against a backdrop of state-of-the-art server farms and data centers that represented the backbone of modern business, was a headshot I'd taken 6 months ago for DataCore's annual report. DataCore Systems, Mr. Harrison read directly from the screen, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the now silent ballroom, has grown from a two-person startup operating out of a rented garage to a $5.2 billion enterprise in just 8 years. Their cloud infrastructure platforms now support over 40% of Fortune 500 companies, making CEO Sarah Chin one of the most influential technology leaders in the world.
The silence that followed wasn't the polite quiet of people listening attentively to a presentation. It was the stunned, airless silence of people trying to process information that fundamentally contradicted everything they thought they knew about reality. Janet, the woman sitting directly beside me, who'd been praising the wisdom of my stable career choices, was the first to find her voice. It came out as barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might somehow make the situation more real than she was prepared to handle. "Isn't this you on Fortune's Co. of the Year cover?" Every head at table 7 turned toward me simultaneously, their expressions cycling rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and dawning recognition. The woman they'd been chatting with about the virtues of secretarial work, the one they'd been offering career advice about accepting limitations, was staring back at them from a magazine cover celebrating the year's most successful business leader. The silence spread outward from our table, like ripples from a stone dropped in perfectly still water. Table 6 noticed the commotion and turned to investigate. Then Table 5. The gentle conversation and soft clinking of silverware that had filled the ballroom moments before was replaced by the heavy, oppressive tension of people realizing that something fundamental about their understanding of the world had just shifted. From the head table, I could see Dad's face in profile as his brain worked furiously to process what he was seeing. His mouth was slightly open, displaying the expression of someone whose most basic assumptions about family hierarchy were being challenged in the most public way possible. Michael had turned completely around in his chair, his networking conversation forgotten, as he stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. His confidence had evaporated entirely, replaced by the confused expression of someone whose understanding of his place in the family success story had just been completely inverted. Mom's face was visible from across the room, her carefully maintained social composure cracking as she tried to process the implications. The practical daughter who'd never had unrealistic dreams, who'd been encouraged to accept her limitations, had somehow built one of the most successful technology companies in American business history. Mr. Harrison continued his presentation completely unaware of the family drama unfolding in his audience. According to Fortune's analysis, DataCore's impact on business efficiency has been truly transformative. Their platform integrations have saved companies an estimated $200 billion in operational costs over the past 3 years alone. The numbers felt surreal as they bounced around the silent ballroom. $5.2 billion company valuation, 40% of Fortune 500 companies, $200 billion in cost savings. These weren't the modest achievements expected from someone who was entry-level forever and more comfortable in supporting roles. The article goes into fascinating detail about Chen's unconventional approach to leadership. Mr. Harrison continued, consulting his notes with the enthusiasm of someone discussing a particularly impressive case study. She started the company with just $50,000 in personal savings and a vision for radically simplifying enterprise data management. Forbes estimates her current net worth at $2.3 billion, and she was recently named one of the 20 most influential women in global technology. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me as the presentation continued, the weight of revelations settling over the room like a thick blanket that made breathing difficult. The family secretary narrative that had defined my identity for 23 years was crumbling in real time, being replaced by a reality that no one in this room had been prepared to accept. The magnitude of the deception was becoming clear to everyone simultaneously. This wasn't a case of modest success being downplayed or achievements being understated. This was a complete alternate reality, a parallel existence that had been maintained through years of careful misdirection and strategic omission. Dad's boss was still talking, but I could see that no one was listening anymore. The entire ballroom was focused on reconciling the woman sitting quietly at table 7 with the transformational business leader being celebrated on screen. The cognitive dissonance was visible on every face, the mental strain of trying to update fundamental assumptions about how the world worked. The most remarkable thing about Chen's story, Mr. Harrison noted, is her philosophy of leadership through what she calls strategic invisibility. According to her Fortune interview, she believes that true power comes from building systems and capabilities rather than seeking personal recognition. She's built a global empire while maintaining almost complete anonymity in her personal life. Strategic invisibility. The phrase hit the room like a physical force, explaining everything and nothing simultaneously.
I hadn't been hiding my success out of shame or insecurity about my achievements. I'd been protecting it, maintaining careful separation between my professional reality and my family's comfortable assumptions about my limitations. Chin argues that the most effective leaders are often the ones who operate below the radar, Mr. Harrison continued, building transformational businesses while avoiding the distractions that come with personal celebrity. Her approach has clearly been successful, as DataCore has achieved more in 8 years than most companies accomplish in decades. The presentation concluded with Mr. Harrison's final thoughts about industry transformation and the evolving nature of leadership in the digital age. But his words were lost in the stunned silence that had overtaken the ballroom. He closed his notes and left the stage, completely unaware that he'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of his company's holiday celebration. For several long moments, no one moved. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, broken finally by the sharp sound of my cousin Jennifer's salad plate hitting the marble floor. She'd been reaching for her water glass and missed entirely, her hands shaking as she stared at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. That single sound seemed to break the spell that had frozen the room. Conversations erupted at every table, urgent whispers and heated discussions as people tried to understand what they'd just witnessed. The volume rose quickly as questions multiplied faster than answers could be formulated or processed. Dad was walking toward my table, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before in 35 years of knowing him. Behind him, Mom was gathering her purse with the mechanical movements of someone in shock, her social autopilot engaged while her conscious mind struggled to process the new reality. Michael remained frozen in his chair, staring at the now blank presentation screen as if waiting for it to make sense of a situation that had no precedent in his understanding of family dynamics or professional hierarchy. Sarah, Dad's voice was carefully controlled. The tone he used in difficult business negotiations when maintaining composure was essential to achieving acceptable outcomes. We need to talk, right now. I nodded and stood, maintaining the calm demeanor that had served me well through 8 years of building DataCore from nothing and 23 years of managing family expectations with surgical precision. The time for strategic invisibility had apparently ended, but the principles that had made me successful remained unchanged. As we walked toward a quiet corner of the ballroom, I could hear fragments of conversation from the tables we passed. That's really her? How is that even possible? Did you know? She never said anything. $5 billion? Fortune magazine? CEO of the year? The questions would multiply exponentially over the coming hours and days. How long had I been running a billion-dollar company? Why had I let them believe I was just a secretary? What else didn't they know about my life? How had I managed to maintain such an elaborate deception for so many years? The answers would require careful consideration and honest conversations that were decades overdue. But for now, as Dad struggled to find words for a situation that had no precedent in our family's carefully ordered history, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The crushing weight of constantly diminished expectations was lifting, being replaced by the terrifying but exhilarating possibility of being seen for who I actually was, rather than who everyone had decided I should be. The family secretary was about to have a very different kind of conversation with her father, the regional vice president who just learned that his daughter was worth more than his entire company's annual revenue. Strategic invisibility had served its purpose perfectly, but the time had come for strategic revelation. The business world had already recognized Sarah Chin as one of their most successful leaders. Now her family would have to decide whether they were ready to meet her.